So in the second half of the Saturday, there's usually some kind of talk, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of different topics and hopefully marry them all together, and then we'll have a time when we can discuss this as well. So there's a sort of central teaching in Buddhism, which very generally is translated as conditioned arising. So everything that you experience comes under the category of conditioned arising. So that means that when you're in one mental state, it gives rise to another mental state of a similar sort. And it could go either way. For example, if you're getting slightly irritated, then you can get very annoyed, and then you can go into a rage. For example, as a sequence, the mental states grow out of the preceding mental state. So this is something that one can apply. This teaching is, in a way, an applied teaching. It's not a theoretical one, but that you start to get your own perception and insight and understanding in how this works for you in your experience, rather than just being theory. So it works, of course, as well with meditation, and that when you're starting to get settled, if you notice that and you stay with that sense of settledness, contentment, appreciation of what's happening, it deepens. That's the whole process of conditioned arising. Out of that comes the sense of letting go, for example, of restlessness and just being much happier with what's happening and what's going on. The qualities of wishing that something else was happening start to get softened, and you're just, this is happening, and you're staying with that contentment, for example. So the underlying principle of conditioned arising is, in a way, the principle upon which our development of our qualities, such as our honesty and our kindness, our care, compassion, our patience, our persistence, our verve for practice, is based. Everything is based on this principle of conditioned arising. So I wanted to just state that, and in a way then start to make it much more tangible and not so principial, as it were. The principle is always here. So in terms of a more applied way of approaching this, especially in terms of meditation initially, is you have intentionality, and you have your ability to stay with your intention. So, just going back briefly to the analogy of the dinghy, you have the intention to steer and stay with the breath, and you go in a certain direction, forward, rather than white, all over the place, get caught in the reeds. But you have that. But you also have the intention to be aware of, using the analogy in a more expanded way, the lake. And the lake is a metaphor for your mind. Your paying attention, you're steering into the breath, but you're also aware of what your mind is like. And this is a primary attitude and skill in mindfulness and meditation. And part of that is you notice something, like you might notice that the water is choppy. Then it might be roughed up. It's not smooth. And there are all kinds of winds and currents taking you, and your mind is ruffled, as it were. So part of the meditation is to be aware of that as well. And part of that is to notice that there are effects of staying with the body and the breath in calming the ruffled nature of the mind, you could say. So, and even allowing you to go deeper than just the surface, what is most obvious, to actually deeper levels and qualities within the mind. And actually, so I wanted to make this point because it's pretty practical. We can sometimes be very literal about meditation. I'm aiming for the breath. That's what I'm doing. That's what it's, mindfulness of the breath. But it's also about being aware of the mind. And so we have to actually broaden that very literal idea and be able to take in the way that the mind is. And using metaphor here is very, very useful. You know, there's lots of ways you can use metaphor. One that just occurs, you can have in everyday life, you can see your life as being a path. And sometimes it's full of brambles and rocky, and there are all kinds of distractions and things coming in from the side. And you just keep going on your path, you deal with the rockiness, you deal with the difficulties, and you just keep on going. And then, you know, at other times it might just be much smoother and easier to move forward. You know, it's not as if you're hacking your way through things. And one of the skills, or part of the skill of mindfulness is noticing the changes. That when it stops being really rough and difficult with obstacles, you adapt. You don't keep hacking when actually things are a lot smoother. So there is the sense of being aware and present adjusts to what's actually happening and flowing with it. And part of the habit that one might have to deal with, well, I quite like hacking away. But no, you don't need to, because your mind now has become much smoother, you know, to carry on with the metaphor, you know. It might be, you know, just altogether more enjoyable. And but I like the conflict. Let go of that. I mean, not everyone likes that conflict, but some people are very habituated to it. So you have to let it go. The metaphor of the path, of a path, is also useful to illustrate the relationship between being aware and engaging with what's actually happening and your achievement or goal orientation tendency. Now, again, not everyone has this. Some people just go la 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 and just sort of dance along the path. And other people, they're looking ahead on the path and saying, well, it should be like that. I'm not there. I should be there. And for some people, that awareness of that tendency and letting go of that tendency to become just more relaxed and and work with what's happening, or play with what's happening, becomes, the task of the metaphor of a path. So again, people have different preferences, you could say, or tendencies in this way. But sometimes when people have the tendency for saying, well, it should be like this and it's not like this, they can give up. I mean, I have a friend who actually is naturally a good painter, but is a perfectionist and just gave up because it wasn't perfect. Such a shame. I have another friend who stayed with it and showed me 2 pictures the other day that they'd done. A dog that they had painted in 1972 or 73, and a different dog, that they had just painted like this week. And the development of skills was unbelievable because they stuck with it. And you go, wow, that is pretty amazing to see what happens when you stay with it. And not just go, well, it should be better. It's not, I can't do it. Living up to your expectations. But there's something interesting in this, because in a way there is a sense, a positive sense of moving towards something. You are moving towards being more skilled in life, to be able to keep the initiative in things rather than forcing and pushing things, controlling things in a hard way, but learning from your experience how to be more flexible, for example, rather than just very hard and fast. You learn. So the path is a learning process, and that learning process is conditioned. Each learning, each stage of understanding about something in the sense of embodying it comes from before, and everything is building up to the next thing. So the principle is always there. So I mentioned intentionality as really important, and staying with your what you're intending to do is in a way the second part of that, and remembering what you're doing rather than jumping away all the time. I mean, personally, I had to really work with my mind jumping off things all the time, and I really at a certain point took it very seriously as a task, for myself. And I think I'm relatively focused. I think I can stay with things pretty well. But that's a development and a huge change from how I was in my early 20s, which is at least one of you might remember, I was all over the place. So you can really appreciate the changes that happen in you and go, wow, yeah, that's great. And it's process. So there's an element of a faculty, even you could call it, of being mindful and being engaged in meditation, where the mind comes together. All the different aspects of the mind come together. I think rather misleadingly, it's often translated as one-pointedness. But I don't think really that gives the flavour. It's more like everything comes together. emotionally, imaginatively, your understanding, your vision about what's important, your caring about what's happening, your aspiration and your inspiration all come together into just being aware, being present and engaged in what you're doing. So you get a sense for yourself how scattered you can be, and you start to bring it all in. You bring in all those elements I just mentioned, bit by bit. You get the skills and the ability to have a rich involvement rather than one-pointed, narrow involvement. That's why I don't like that term, one-pointed. It's too narrow. Let's just hear it up for David Hockney for a moment. Anyone familiar with, yeah, hooray, David Hockney. He's got this vision that he wants to transform the way our brains work. And it's fantastic. So he says, just briefly, paraphrasing him, the lens and the media and photography has made us very perspective oriented. So everything goes like that. Well, from your point of view. From my point of view, it goes like that. And he said, well, actually, the brain and the eye doesn't work like that. We've been conditioned into this or that by the lens. But actually, when through painting, his paintings, he's done a series of painting to deliberately decondition us, and from perspective or tunnel vision, as he calls it, into the natural way of seeing, which actually everything has its place, and the mind goes da 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 da, and it takes it all in. And there might be a focus, but it's not closed focus, just on one thing. And I think this is a very good illustration of, this way of the whole of oneself being taken in. There are a number of ways that can be taken, but I mean it in the best sense, taking in how you are, being receptive, and it all flowing in the same direction. So I'm going to do a little shift here, a jog, boing, to one side. The Saturday morning classes have a theme for this year of the spiritual community and Sangha. And most of the talks are concentrating on different aspects of that. So I like to at least include it a little bit, and I have a particular way of talking about it today that I'd like to introduce. When you buy something in a shop and you look at the label and it says it has a sell-by date. So I've transferred that or converted that into a see-by date. And it works for me very well. You could play with it. You have a bunch of friends in different contexts, different places, and I know pretty instinctively what my see-by date is. So I've got a friend very close by. My see-by date is twice or three times a week. And we know that if we go lower than one, that's not quite right. You know who I'm talking about. And so we're both, fortunately, operating by the same see-by date. It can get clunky when you have different see-by dates. I've got a friend who I've known since I was 10. Our see-by date is once a year because they live a long way away, and it's more difficult, it's tricky. But if we pass that see-by date, we both feel uncomfortable. So you can, as it were, bring that closer in, not just to individuals and friendship and connection with people who come to the centre or who are practicing, but also generally classes. You could say, it's a bit clumsy, come by date, come to the centre, you know, how often would you like to come to the centre to connect with people, with the practices, with the teachings, to refresh and boost what you're doing, you know, and what is too long, you know, where actually you feel that your connection is very attenuated and thin, you know, what keeps you fresh. So in that way you have your own little redirector. And it could be 3 times a week, it could be 2 or 1 time a week or every 2 weeks. But you check with your inner instinct of what is a see by date. You know? And so what that does is it keeps you connected with other people who are practicing. So that's my nod to the Sangha. So I want to go back very briefly to following your experience and finish with this. So I think a dichotomy of words which illustrates this is holding to your experience in a fluid way. So holding here is not fixing, but staying with something that's changing. Your experience of yourself as someone who's changing. So holding here is positive. I mean, it can be seen obviously as negative, holding on to tensions, holding on to problems, holding on to animosities, blah, 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 like that. But I don't mean it in that way in this moment. It's staying with a continually flowing change and contrasting holding or staying with to grasping. And it can be very interesting to notice how you have a good experience and you just hold on to it in a grasping way. You know, you really want it. And as soon as you do that, all the fluidity and playfulness and joy of it is lost. You know, I have a really good example of this nearly every week. I visit my mother, and we have a great time. I might be there nearly the whole day. She's 103. She's got a clear mind most of the time, and we have a great time. At the moment, we're using AI to learn about things, and she's really loving it. Where does that come from? Oh, that little box. How does it do that? Oh, yeah, that's different. But we're fluid and we're engaged, and it's enjoyable. And then right at the end, after 4.5 to 5 hours, I say, okay, I'm going. I've got a house meeting Mondays. And that's when she grasps. And it really, you can see how in a way it ruins everything. No, don't go, you know, stay. I can't, you know, and it's time. And sometimes she gets it. And she just says, well, thank you, darling, it was lovely. You know. And other times she doesn't. But the illustration of that is recognizing it for yourself when things come to their natural end and conclusion rather than grasping it, letting it move on. What's next? And I think that's a very good question, actually. What's next here? So, you know, you learn to change and adapt and learn in every situation that you're in.